Hello, and welcome to the Freebirth with Jesus podcast by Awaken Birth. I am co-host Alison Collins.
And I am co-host Nadia Taylor. We are radical Christian mothers and birth keepers who are passionate about Jesus and free birth.
On the podcast, we will share testimonies of Christian mothers from all across the world who have free birthed with Jesus, and we'll talk all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Welcome to the Freebirth with Jesus podcast. I'm Alison, and unfortunately, Nadia isn't with us today. She's had a family emergency that she's had to go to. So we just lift her up to God and ask that you protect her. So this is our guest, Sadie, today. So excited to have you. Thank you for coming into the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll start off. Maybe if you can just introduce yourself, say your name, where you're from, a little bit about your story with Jesus, and any previous births that you want to kind of touch on.
Sure.
And then go straight into your birth story whenever you're ready.
Well, my name is Sadie, and I live in Cody, Wyoming with my 5 children and my husband. I am pregnant with our 6th baby. I grew up in the Christian faith and in the church, and my grandfather was a pastor. I don't specifically remember when I got saved, but I do know that during my teenage years and my young adult life, I turned away from God and lived life for me. And after I had my first baby at 23, I rededicated my life to living for Him. And so I've gone on to have 5 children now. My first baby was an unnecessary C-section. I had the gambit of the interventions, the Pitocin, the epidural, just all the things. And I didn't go into that birth with a plan. I didn't know what I know now. And I feel like I was taken advantage of, and just, the whole industrialized medical birth. And after that birth, I struggled with anger that I had that C-section, and I couldn't even put into words why it angered me so much. And everybody around me was like, well, why does it matter? You have a healthy baby, But I just was so angry at the way it went and felt taken advantage of. And so when I got pregnant with my second, I started to really kind of research. I watched The Business of Being Born and just kind of opened my eyes a little bit. And so we decided we went back to that same hospital because they had taken on midwives, like CNM midwives, certified nursing midwives. And so I saw a midwife through my pregnancy with her, and I really enjoyed that midwife. She was very nice. Went on to have my second Ada in the hospital, and it was a VBAC, albeit very medicalized VBAC. I didn't have any epidural or anything like that, but they thought she was coming out too fast, and so they used forceps, and I had an episiotomy, and it was really dramatic in the moment, but I felt very victorious that I had had a VBAC in a hospital. And so then going into my third pregnancy, I saw a different midwife at that same hospital, loved her. It was a great experience, and I had a very looking back, it's not as hands-off as I believe birth should be, but it was, for a hospital, pretty hands-off. I was able to labor how I wanted. And then when I went into the hospital, there was 2 things about that birth that I really did not like. Looking back now too, they hooked up the fetal heart rate monitor to her head. And that, to me, looking back now, that's just so unnecessary. And then, so I had her just fine, however I wanted to. And then right after she came out, the midwife gave me a shot of Pitocin to get placenta coming out. And that really upset me because it's painful to have Pitocin, and I didn't need it. I've never had any issues with retaining, nothing. So looking back at that birth, although it was a good birth in a hospital, comparatively, there are things that I know now that I don't like about it. So that was my 3 girls. And when we got pregnant with our 4th, we had all the intention of going back to that hospital and seeing the midwives. And I had joined a group on Facebook for home birth. And so I was kind of thinking about a home birth, but there's only one midwife in this area. And for some reason, I just didn't feel like God was telling me to see her. And so we had all the intention of going back to the hospital and using the CNMs. So another thing that had happened during my pregnancies was I slowly came around to loathing prenatal visits, just hating them. Why are they necessary? What is the purpose? I am taking, and I have to drive a half hour to these appointments, and they just seemed so unnecessary. Like, I can do all of this at home, but these tell me nothing. And so when I became pregnant with my 4th, I actually waited forever before making an appointment. I think I was well halfway into the pregnancy before I made an appointment with the certified nursing midwife at the hospital. And so when I went in there, she informed me that the policy had changed in the 18 months since I last had a baby, and that the hospital now no longer allowed midwives to deliver high-risk pregnancies. And I was deemed high risk because of the one C-section I had had. And so that she couldn't see me, and I would be forced to see the OB. So I left, and I actually called the head nursing out of their human resource center at the hospital. I talked to them, and then I wrote a letter to the hospital board, basically asking to be allowed to have this midwife. Never heard a single word from anybody. So while all of this is happening, I'm on this home birth page, but unassisted births keep popping up, these stories. And I remember talking to my mom about it, talking to my sister about it, and we just couldn't believe that people are out there having babies with nobody, and that just seemed so wild. But it just kept popping up in my life. And so we were in this limbo. I'm 30 some weeks pregnant. We didn't know what to do. And I remember praying to God and asking, what do you want me to do? I don't feel like I can see this OB. I had brief interaction with him with my previous pregnancy, and I did not enjoy him at all. I just don't like him. And I was praying, and I'm like, God, I believe I know what you want in a birth, and I just don't feel like it's there. What do you want me to do? And I felt like he kept asking me to trust him, and to trust him alone, and to do it alone. And I really, for quite a few weeks, struggled with submitting to that, because that just seemed so outrageous and scary. But I, kept praying, and then the weirdest things would happen. We were denied insurance. So the hospital was like, you can set up as cash payment, but they wanted, over $1,000 a month as a payment. And it's just everything, I felt like God was just pushing me, like, Sadie, you're doing this. And so finally, I think I was 34, 35 weeks. I finally was like, okay, God, I will do this. I will have this baby, without any medical professional. And so I had asked God for 3 things. I asked that the pushing stage be fast and smooth, that I wouldn't have to push for a while. I asked God that everybody who attended my birth, which would be my husband, my sister, my mom, and my cousin, that they would all have peace, and that nobody would feel scared or that anything was wrong. but that if God wanted us to go, that we need to go somewhere on all of us collectively. And then the third thing I asked was that he would grant me birth in the middle of the night where my other children were sleeping, and I didn't have to worry about them there or, taking them somewhere. So that was the three things that I asked for in this birth. And I started preparing to have this baby alone. We knew he was a boy. And so I did a bunch of reading and watching videos and listening to unassisted podcasts. And I eventually ended up deleting my Facebook because, people knew I was pregnant, and then they were asking me questions. Who are you going to see? Where are you going? And I just kind of felt like I needed to pull in and protect my space. So the next couple of weeks were just preparing for this birth and all of that entails. And one thing I didn't prepare for was going over 42 weeks. My girls were all born around the 40-week mark, and my son was born 42 weeks and 2 days. And that really made me have to dig in and trust God, because I don't know why that really had me mentally messed up at the end, but I just kept trusting God that he was okay, that my son was okay. And I had to dispel all those fears of the placenta getting old or something's wrong. And I just had to continually pray and ask God to just take care of us. And I just really had to deal with those fears. And it wasn't pretty all the time. I wasn't a very nice person to be around, I feel like, at the end there. So on the day of my son's birth, I started having contractions, but they were very, very infrequent contractions. I would have a couple good ones for an hour and then nothing for several hours, and then an entire hour of contractions that were 15 minutes apart, and then nothing, and then contractions for 10 minutes apart for an hour. And so I actually was pretty discouraged because I just didn't feel like that was making any progress. And I remember calling my grandmother and crying that I just was tired of this and he needed to come out. She said to me, you just go to bed, just go to sleep. And so I went to bed pretty early that night, like 6 o'clock in the evening. And I woke up at 1:30 in the morning to some pretty decently strong contractions. I labored in bed for just a little bit, and then my water broke all over our bed. And I remember thinking, okay, this is it, God, And my husband shot out of bed and he says, "Call your mom. I'm still in the pool." And I remember telling him, "No, don't do any of that. My contractions are like 15 minutes apart. There's no way this is going to take a while." And he said, "Sadie, I'd really just feel comfortable if your mom was here." So I called my mom while he was getting the pool all set up. And she kind of agreed with me that, based on how spaced apart they were, that it was going to be a long night, probably into the morning. But she said she slowly worked her way over to our house. And so we just spent the next hour just going through the labor lands, having contractions. I spent a lot of time on the toilet. That just felt like the best place to have these contractions. And eventually my mom and my sister and my cousin showed up, and it was about 3:30 in the morning when everyone showed up. And I remember I was sitting on the toilet just freezing cold and shaking. And looking back, I had hit transition, but I didn't know I was in transition. I think my mom kind of assumed, guessed that I was based on how much I was shaking. And so my mom was like, do you think you want to maybe get into the pool? Like, it's nice and warm. And I was so in denial that this was going to be quick because of how they just were so far apart, these contractions. So I get into the pool And as soon as I get into the pool, I have back-to-back contractions. And my mom looks at me and she's like, are you bearing down? And I was like, I just really don't know. And my husband was there holding my hand. And I remember he just kept saying Jesus over and over. He's like, Jesus, 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 over and over. And I just truly know that Jesus was right there with us. Like, it just felt so peaceful, so calming. I had no doubt that I was where I was meant to be and that I was safe, and that I just a peace that surpasses understanding came over us in that room, and everybody felt it. And then I felt pressure, and I reached down, and there was his head. And so he just came out so smoothly and so fast. God answered that prayer of mine that he just would come. Like, the pushing did not last long. I think I pushed maybe 3 times, and he came right out. And so God answered all 3 of my prayers in that birth. He answered that the push-in wouldn't be super long, that everybody would feel peace, and that my children slept through my birth. So I had my son at, I think it was 4:20 in the morning. So that it was just the most beautiful birth. I felt like, just even looking back now, it wasn't a painful birth. It was uncomfortable, but it was not painful. And I was just hooked. I just loved it so much. My entire family has been changed because of that birth. My mom, my sister, my cousin. It was just a very beautiful experience. It felt so healing to have nobody touching me, nobody touching my baby. And then just to know that I did what God asked me to do and that he took care of me. It was a beautiful, beautiful birth. So then fast forward a couple years, and I am pregnant again. And this time I decided to not even have any prenatal care outside of me whatsoever. He was a wild pregnancy. We had no ultrasounds. I did nothing really. It was, it was the best. It was the best not seeing anybody, because I don't know, my previous previous pregnancies, seeing people, even though I would have, a very textbook normal pregnancy, I felt like every time I saw somebody, there was some level of fear that they tried to put into me. All 4 of my babies that I, sought outside care with, all 4 of them, I was measuring big. And so they would have me do extra ultrasounds to make sure the babies were the right size, that I didn't have gestational diabetes, and just all sorts of unnecessary fear going, in these pregnancies. And so with my 5th baby, we just chose to forego all of that and had a completely wild pregnancy. And I just loved that. That was one of the best, just having nobody involved. It was just amazing. And so I went to 41 weeks and I think 3 days. So with that pregnancy, the entire time I had this vision that I would birth alone. And I really wanted to birth alone. I really wanted to just wake up in the middle of the night and go out into the living room, make a little bed on the floor, and have a baby while everyone was sleeping, and do it by myself and just wake up everybody to a baby. That was what I really wanted. And I just kept telling everybody, you just watch, I'm going to have a baby alone. So I went to 41 weeks, 3 days, and I woke up one morning and I was making coffee and my water broke. And 7:00 in the morning, so excited. Everyone's so excited. I remember my kids told the FedEx man that mom was having a baby today, and it was just a lot of excitement. But nothing happened. My water broke and nothing happened. And so I spent the whole day just walking around, leaking fluid everywhere. And I remembered at some point getting kind of anxious that nothing was happening. And so I would just have to turn in And I just kept praying, like, God, and I kept asking him, to help me through this again and we peace again. And so I did feel a lot of peace that first day. And then that night I had contractions all the way until about 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they just stopped. Nothing happened. So I went to sleep and I woke up and no baby, no nothing. And I just remember feeling really anxious that now my water had been broken for an entire day and there's no baby. And oh my gosh, what if there's an infection? And I just had to keep going back into those fears and, and turning to God and be like, well, I trust you with this. And I knew he was I didn't know what the baby was at the time, but I could feel him moving and I knew he was okay. And it just took a lot of trust again that I was where God wanted me to be. And so I spent the day, at our house, just piddling around, and I took a really long nap, and that was a beautiful nap. I woke up feeling a lot better about the situation. And so then that evening, my mom brought over dinner for us. I was releasing all day, and it was, but oh my goodness, it gushed up out of me. Like, I don't think I must not have had any water left in me after this, because I just could not believe how much water just gushed out of me when I was sitting here having dinner. So my mom left and we put the children down, and praise the Lord, they all went to sleep. It was just so easy that night. And I went into my room and it was like, bam, labor started. And there was no slow intro to it. There was no working its way up to hard contractions. It was hard right away. So I think my mom had been gone for maybe 40 minutes. I texted her and I said, well, they're pretty bad. Maybe we should come back. So her and my sister came back. And at this point, it was probably 9 when they got here. And this labor was just so different than my previous free birth. It was very painful, very, very painful. And I remember at points, and I guess I never said any of this out loud. I thought I did, but my mom said I was totally silent. But in my mind, I kept thinking, they need to take me out of here. They need to take me somewhere, because I can't do this. This is so painful. I cannot do this. Then I remember having this whole conversation with myself. I was like, I can't even go to the bathroom. I can't even make it to the toilet. How am I going to make it to the truck and to town? And I kept having these conversations with myself, like, I need to go in to see somebody, but no, I can't go see somebody. What are they going to do for me? They can't do anything. And I just remember thinking, nobody can help me. Nobody can help me. But then I would pray, God, you could help me, So that was very painful. I felt like my pelvis was being ripped apart. It was just an intense pain. But I felt pressure to push, and so I pushed for all I was worth, and he slid right out. And it was great. And so going back to how I envisioned myself being alone, I actually am so thankful that God knew better than what I knew, because I needed my people there. My previous free birth, I felt amazing right after. This one, I did not. I believe that I lost a little more blood than I typically lose, and I got really weak and shaky. And my sister was there with tinctures and cayenne pepper, and my mom was feeding me meatloaf, and I just needed my people there to take care of me. And I'm so grateful that God knew that I needed them and I wasn't alone. And then this is kind of funny. Looking back, my sister recently had a baby, and so we were watching my birth videos and looking back on this most recent free birth, we realized that my son was born sunny side up. And that's probably why it was super painful. I had no idea. until we watched that video back, and I don't know how we missed that, but we did. And yeah, he was born sunny side up, and he's doing just fine. So those are my 2 unassisted births, and I am pregnant with my 6th, and I'm planning another wild and unassisted birth, and I love it. I'm all about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I really
Yes.
coming on and sharing both stories and even your previous birth, because every time we birth, no matter how it is, it always affects the next one.
And it changes us every single time.
100%. It's not like, at the second I was like, oh, this is a little bit different. But then I'm number 5 and you're now coming into number 6. It's like, no.
Yes.
They change you. Like 100%. At a time.
They do. Yeah, I do. And I will say my first unassisted birth changed me in the way that I just became more confident in my mothering a bit. Like after my first free birth, I just knew that I could mother, that God gave me these children to mother. And it was a really neat, it was really neat to finally feel like I didn't owe anybody an explanation and that I only owe God.
So after you had your son, how long was it until you delivered the placenta?
Oh, my placentas both times came out within, I want to say 10 minutes, within 10 minutes. That was true of all of my vaginal birth, that my placentas came out just fine, totally. So, and that's why I'm not sure why that midwife gave me Pitocin, because that seemed so unnecessary. Like I just,
yeah. And it's like sometimes that's just like protocol and procedure, and it's like somewhat of a conflict for them. And not for me though. Like my body's pretty, it's good. Like it knows what it's doing.
Yes.
Yeah. I've had a midwife just come up behind and jab it straight in the leg. Yeah. Actually, both. I've had 2 hospital and now 2 pre-birth, one with the twins, and both hospitals, the protocol, 2 different states, but they both had the same thing. It's like, no, we just do it without us.
Yeah.
Like we just come up behind.
Yeah.
And you hear midwives in the hallway just talking to one another, or the student midwives coming through, and they say things like, you just do it when they're distracted. And it's like, I'm sorry. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Would that be okay?
Yeah. And it's so painful. Pitocin is no joke. I mean,
and I found that, like having the Pitocin because I was induced, and then they gave me the shot as well, and I ended up with retained placenta because of the
yes.
And I found that to be so incredibly painful first when I had the twins. And I can tell you, the twins, like the placenta was huge. It was like another baby. Like it was.
Yeah.
And even with Bella, my most recent bub, like it was like, oh yeah, like, that was not super comfortable, and that's not my favorite.
Yeah.
Birth and labor.
Sure.
But
yes.
But it's not like, that is jabbed in the foreign object as well. But
no.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, mine kids, they were uncomfortable. It's at that point you definitely want it done.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like, okay, it's time to just be done with all of this now. It all needs to come out of me.
Yes.
And what I love about natural births is that the feeling afterwards, you just feel so good and you're not numb. And so it's like you go through those, the uncomfortableness and the pain, and then it's gone. And it just feels, it's like the biggest sigh of relief you could ever have. And love it.
Yeah, it's addictive. I mean,
yes,
I feel like that's why I'm like, okay, let's have a million babies. Like, we could do that. I feel like I've said this a couple of times on the show now. Like, I've looked at my husband at 2 weeks postpartum after Bella and just been like, okay, I'm ready. Like, I don't want to do it 2 weeks after, but like, I'm like, I can feel that, because like, you're still on that high and it's untouched. And I was completely undisturbed. Like, I stayed home. My mum was beautiful. She took my kids out every day for like 2 hours in the morning before that time. And, you know, me and my husband just got to stay home, cuddling in bed for 2 hours, just staring at our new baby, you know. And that's sweet. Yeah, it was beautiful. And so, yeah, it's just, you're on that high, and it's addictive. It is so addictive.
Yeah.
It's a shame that more women aren't able to experience a thing like that kind of, level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was like, that kind of drug.
Yeah, and then, like, speaking to postpartum, with my first unassisted birth, I felt so good afterwards that I was immediately up and immediately doing things, and that kind of came around to bite me. That's, you know, my bleed lasted a long, long time because of that, and so my second free birth, I really prioritized not going anywhere, not doing anything, just staying in bed. And so my husband and children, they brought me food, they brought me drinks, and we were in our little cocoon for probably 6 days, and it was just wonderful. Like and I'll do that again. Like, you need to just stay in bed and rest with your baby, you know?
And it's so nice. Like, it really is.
Yeah.
That postpartum period, it's so underrated. So
yeah.
How far along now?
I am 8 weeks.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you.
So you got lots of time to just keep processing this. Yeah. God, and that's awesome. What's your age gap between all of your children?
So my oldest is 11, and my youngest he's almost 3. He'll be 3 in a month.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got 11, 9, 7, 5, and 3.
Yeah, wow.
This baby will be the longest age gap that we have.
Yeah. So I went 6 years, and then, you know, Laura was out of nappies and doing school and, you know, in a whole different season of being a child.
Yes.
And then we had a baby. And I looked at my husband and I was like, if we're going to be in nappies, can we just stay in them until we're done?
Just stay in them. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, if we're waking up in the middle of the night like 5 million times, just stay like
just
that.
Do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to stop that.
That was our thoughts for the 4. And then we unexpectedly got pregnant with 5. Yeah. And we never said no to being done, because I do believe that you should leave that up to God.
I have a couple of questions that I'd love to ask. I know that I was already kind of asking some, but coming back to the beginning, you said that in your previous birth in the hospital, that baby was coming too fast, and so they needed to use forceps. And so I was like, oh, I've never really encountered that. Like I know. I know I hear like the opposite, like baby's not fast enough, so we're going to. So did they give a reasoning for that, or?
Well, they just, so what had happened was I waited a very long time to go in because I wasn't going to have them slow me down. And so when I got in there, they checked me and I was, I don't know, 5 centimeters or something. And then 20 minutes later, I felt this. It was like a full body heave pushing out this baby. Just, I was like, I think I need to push. And they all started screaming at me to stop pushing. That you're not even fully dilated yet. Don't push. And they checked me and I was like at 9.5. And so I don't know why, and I didn't have the midwife that I had been seeing. I had an on-call doctor, because that's what the hospital does. When she was not on call, you don't have her. And so, my body was just, I could not physically stop pushing. And he got the forceps. Her heart rate was decelerating a bit. And that's why they did the forceps. But I believe her heart was decelerating a little bit because she was coming down the birth canal so fast. Yeah. And so the forceps, I believe, were completely unnecessary. I think she would have just come out just as fast as she did, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to go, like, to hear from like hospital to hospital and what they do and why they do it. I was like, if I hear something, I'm like, what's that about?
Yes. And then with that one, he gave me the piece of anatomy. That was unnecessary. And
did he ask you for consent to do the episiotomy?
I do not believe so. I don't remember. I believe it was one of those, like, I'm going to do an episiotomy now.
Yeah, I'm not actually asking, I'm just telling you as I'm doing it. It's like, so you don't have enough time to process what I'm saying. It's just happening.
Right. And I was just, my body was pushing without me. And I remember everybody telling me to stop. And it's like, I cannot stop, and I just remember being in that headspace. And then,
So I think you have some interesting topics that kind of are related in the sense of C-section and episiotomy and forceps. Did you have to work through, and I know that these things happen to other women and then they go on to free birth or they're considering free birth. And I'm kind of asking in that sort of light is, did you have to do any like unlearning or retraining that like my body does know how to have a baby, it does know how to start labor, I don't need a C-section, did any of those things come into play the first time or even the second time?
Right. Well, yes, with my second pregnancy, it did. I really had to work through the fear that I would have a uterine rupture, that I couldn't do this without a C-section. And so I did work through that with my second birth. And then, for having a VBAC in a hospital, and I will say I had to fight tooth and nail to have that VBAC in the hospital because they just don't want you to do that. And so I felt like that was the war that I was constantly fighting that whole entire pregnancy. And I feel like God blessed it in that I went into labor right on her due date, and it was such a like textbook type of labor. It started just like you wanted to start, and there was nothing weird about it. And I feel like God blessed that because he knew I was going to be in a hospital where I had to fight to have the act. And so then after that, I was like, oh, well, you will never give me a C-section again. And, and so I just knew that I could do it without a doubt. And the reasoning for them giving me a C-section, they told me and it was again an OB who was on call. It wasn't the OB who I was seeing, although I did feel like in that pregnancy, I was just cattle being herded in and herded out. Nobody knew me. Nobody cared to get to know me. I was just a number to them. And so I was seeing this one OB and he was out of town. And so then it was this on-call gal and she was newer and my waters had been open for too long. And which is just the whole thing. Like, look, it just was so dumb. And the whole time I had a feeling that nothing that they would do was right. But I remember even telling myself, just be a good patient, and looking back now, I would never be a good patient. They would hate me so much.
Yeah.
People would just rue the day. Yeah. But I just didn't know any better. I didn't know that they didn't have viewer interests. And so I was told this was one of the reasonings that I had to have a C-section is that my pelvis was too small to have this baby. I asked her, well, why do I need a C-section? And she said, well, it could be that your baby is too big or your pelvis is too small. And my baby was 6 pounds, 5 ounces. And I have birthing hips. And so I just was like, I don't think that that's true.
Yeah. In Australia and in America, it's very similar. Like we base a lot of our protocols and procedures off of US recommendations. And so from my understanding, to diagnose a small pelvis is you have to have an X-ray. And you should absolutely be having that X-ray before pregnant. You should not be doing that whilst pregnant. So it's always interesting when that's thrown out there for a C-section. And it's like, what are we basing this off of?
And it's super rare to have a small pelvis, or you've gotten into an accident and you've broken your pelvis, or something weird has taken place. And then I do remember the nurse making a joke that my baby was a dinner time C-section.
Oh,
as they wanted to go home.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, though, and that's exactly what it was.
It's like, at least they're not lying. But I don't know, like, when hell the lining in that, like, it's terrible. Just like when we're talking about C-sections, like, they're not easy. I personally, I do not think that when a woman is like, oh, I'm having a C-section, that's the easy way out. I'm like, that does not sound easy.
It's
at all.
It's not. It is not. No, it is so hard to have C-section. Yeah, it's not an easy way out for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why women shouldn't be having them at like a 20 to 70% rate in different hospitals.
Yeah.
You know? Like, you know, it's incredible to think that we genuinely believe that God created 20 to 70% of women incapable of birthing a baby. Like that's really how faulty his design is. That's
I know.
Interesting take. Like,
I know. And I remember in that pregnancy, I didn't think I would ever have a C-section. It didn't even cross my mind to prepare for that. And so it was quite the shock. And then while I was there, they did another C-section. Like she did 2 back to back. And I remember thinking, why, how can that be? How can that be right?
Yeah.
But that's what she did.
And was yours classified as like an emergency C-section?
No, they just, I don't know what they classified it as, but the baby she was fine. Like there was no kind of emergency distress. It was purely because she was uncomfortable for how long my waters had been open and the risk of infection. And
the hospital saying, hey, my waters have broken at this time. And
yes, I did I did all the wrong things. My water broke. We called the hospital. I said, come in immediately.
Yeah.
And well, it turns out it was a high leak in the sac. And it probably would have been very similar to how my 5th birth went, in that labor didn't start for a couple days, you know?
Yeah.
And I went right, and then, you know, they're checking me. So they're constantly introducing the possibility of an infection.
Yeah.
And then because I wasn't dilating and because I wasn't having consistent enough contractions, they put me on Pitocin. And that was horrifically painful. Like, I would give me natural birth all day long.
Like, any days a week. So I think that that definitely leads into my next question would be, do you consider yourself now still having VBACs?
I guess so. I mean, I don't use that language much anymore.
Yeah.
I did when I had the 2 at the hospital after my C-section, but I don't use that term anymore.
In the sense that, like, now that I just had my 5th, I haven't had a C-section, but you know, all of the things that kind of ran through the first pregnancy and then what happened in my 2nd, and the further away I'm getting from the first ones, the less I'm like identifying with that and finding like I'm obviously I find my identity in Christ, but I'm watching what he's doing in each of those where he's leading me, and then I'm like, oh, I'm actually forming my identity in real creation, the truth of my body, and trust in that you, the Holy Spirit, will be the one to alert me in anything I need, anything for my body or for my baby.
Yeah.
Because it's not just this like blind trust and it doesn't matter if anything bad's happening or signs.
Right. That's not, I know. And that's why I think people think sometimes, but it's not. It's actually a lot of mental work.
Kind of is it?
Right? It's just, it's like, it's a lot of mental preparing to do this, you know, no matter the outcome too. Like I had to really wrestle with that God, I trust you no matter what happens to me or this baby. Like,
you know, that's a really big thing to, like, it always reminds me of Hannah, like putting her child before God and saying, I will give him to you.
Yes.
And it's just like, well, that's like, Yeah. When after you have kids and you've gone through, especially like for my personal journey, like when I went into free birthing and my relationship changed with God in that way, reading that story now versus when I used to read it hospital birth and then no kids, I'm like, oh, that hits so differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you were doing that with your mum and your sister being with your first free birth. So maybe number 4 is just like asking that God would give them that peace. And I'm just like that, you know.
Yeah. And it was really neat because when I went to my parents and told them that I was doing this, they had never heard of this before.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that they allowed me to be an adult and make those decisions without, you know, you hear stories of parents just losing their minds, telling them their adult children what to do. And my parents did not do that. They spent a couple months having to wrestle with fear themselves. And my mom said she really had to give that to God too, because she thought it was a little crazy. She didn't understand it. And it scared her. It scared her to have, you know, to do this. But she worked through that fear with the Lord herself. And it was really neat. And my sister, the same thing. And so there just was no fear in that room. And there wasn't with my second free birth either. There just was no fear. Like everybody just trusted that this was God's plan, that this is God's design, and leave it alone, you know?
Yeah. And it totally shifts the whole space, like circle and intimate just on its own. And then when you're adding people who Christian themselves and like that's the only people that are in your room, it really just turns almost into worship, and not like singing, praising, but a really, really different type of raw worship. Yeah, it's life-changing, I reckon. And I picked up on how you were talking with your last, because now you're on your 6th, but your last, you were saying it was like the hardest labor, and obviously being sunny side up, I can understand why that would be.
Yeah.
But I kind of, we were just talking about this on a different episode too, that and I hear it a lot in women, especially like if you get on like the Facebook groups or whatnot, and when you're talking to women who've had more than 2 or 3 kids, it's like that baby or 5th baby is like that wild card. And I did not remember this with my 5th at all.
I didn't even know this. Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't until like just the other day when I was talking to her, like, and I was like, it's weird that like people talk about it. It's not, you know, there's always an exception to the rule sort of thing. And
sure,
it's not every single woman, but I just found it really interesting that, you know, it's the 3rd baby and then the 5th. And I was like, yeah, because my 5th, she was my longest and she was my hardest labor. And I really had to dig deep with her. Yeah. Hey, get this baby. Like, let's do this, please. And she wasn't even a long labor. She was 7 hours. Like that's long for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's like double my normal.
Yeah. Double. Yeah. He wasn't, I was very grateful that the active stage with him wasn't very long, because I think it started at 8 and I had him at 11. So it was not long, but looking back and like being in it, it felt so long. I mean, it was incredibly painful and it was hard, but I got through it, and you get birth dates, you know, and I don't regret it at all. And there was nothing about it where I felt like anybody outside of that could have helped me. Like I knew if I went into the hospital, they couldn't help me. You know, I had to go through this and just got to push through.
Yeah. And it's in that time where it's like a little bit of a balance, because we're pushing in and when we're trusting ultimately that God has created us to be able to do this. And so we're digging into that ability that God's given us and we're holding into. And then it's also in line with like, okay, God, but I also need you to bring me into this too.
Yeah.
Like,
I need your help.
Like I know you built me to do this, but like I don't want to do this without you. Like I need you to be able to do this. Yeah, I so feel that. And then you were saying that, like, him being sunny side up, I wondered, with your last free birth and the one before, did you have any tearing or
No.
like, oh,
no tearing either time. I know. I know. And I didn't even have tearing with my third hospital birth. Yeah. So that was, yeah.
Yeah, because that would, like, it's a really big fear that, like, they don't, their body won't know how to naturally tear, or it'll open that episiotomy wound. And there's a lot of fear around that. But yeah, women are so incredible, and God's created our bodies.
And I just...
God's created our bodies to be able to stretch and have baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just, like, letting your body do the work will help you to not have any issues. Like pushing when your body is pushing.
Yeah.
Probably not going to tear, you know?
Yeah. And it's like, as much as you want to just, like, push through the pain, it's like embracing it as hard as it is. But yeah, just embracing it. And I found that, like, with Bella, my last, that it was, I remember being there, feeling that ring of fire, and you just be like, Holy Spirit, lead to the fire, like, just, and I probably had a couple of other phrases. After you've had baby, what do you do with your checkups? Do you go in? I don't know what legally is necessary.
It's legal here to have unassisted births. There's nothing illegal about it. So, but no, I didn't do anything. I just, stayed home.
And do you have to do any, like, postnatal checks for baby, or?
Nope.
Oh, that's good. That's nice. You don't have that pressure.
No. I mean, I felt some of that pressure with my first unassisted. People would ask me, "Are you going to take him in to see the pediatrician?" And I'm like, why? You know, and I did. I did bring him in at, like, 10 days because I kind of felt that pressure to do so.
Yeah.
And with my second son, my second free birth, I didn't. I was like, I can see that he's fine.
Yes.
There was no obvious signs to me that there was any issues. I could tell he could hear, you know, because he would, you know, listen to me.
Someone bangs something and they're like, oh.
Yes. Yep. And so actually my fifth has never seen a pediatrician.
Yeah. Yeah, because we don't call them wellness checks, but we have, like, something that is kind of like that. And so but they're not like something, they're really just like, come and get your needles. That's what it is. Like, it's very like, everyone, they're not called wellness checks. Like, it's very in your face, which I find interesting that here in Australia, we just straight up call them, like, it's time to go get our needles. Like, that's what the purpose of the natural, like, this meeting is. Yeah, because they don't try to hide it here at all, which is, at least they're not hiding it. Yeah. But it's so nice to just, like, be at home and not feel like you have to then go anywhere and hand it to someone and, you know, have them breathing down your throat, calling you a bad mother, and everyone's going to die.
Yeah. With my first unassisted birth, this is kind of a funny story. I took him into the pediatrician, and the pediatrician asked me, "Oh, you had a home birth? What midwife did you use?" And I was like, "Well, I actually just had him alone." And he looked at me and he was like, "Well, how did you know when to push?"
I don't
know.
He's still in there. It's like, no one's told me to do it yet.
It's the funniest thing.
I find it interesting. Yeah, I get that a lot of people, like, they don't understand it. And at one point I didn't understand it. And I was like, you know,
absolutely
as well, like, oh, those women are wild. Like, I had the same thought. I remember even saying to my dad, like, I would never be one of those women. And then the first time I free birth, I do it with twins, and they're 34 weeks. Like, I'm like the crazy lady. But yeah, it's interesting to hear some of the things that people are connecting that's associated for them. And just watching their brains tick over, and they're like, how does this work? And there's been some interesting questions, like, how do you know the baby, like, knows how to breastfeed? Or
I know,
how the baby, like, we'll do this. And it's like,
I know.
you look at it. Like,
it's amazing how much we have turned over our instincts to others now, and how we have to ask permission. You know, as a society, we feel like we should ask permission from doctors or professionals. Is this okay to do it like this? Or is this how it should be? How do we know when to push? How do we know how to breastfeed? How do we know my baby's okay? And all of this is so instinctual and just created in us.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was preparing for my first free birth, I just kept thinking of animals and how we're always taught to leave birthing animals alone. Birthing cows, birthing deer. You know, we have a lot of deer out here. You're not meant to mess with them. They're meant to be left alone. And you can very ruin the process by even just going up to them. And so I just
mother and baby can both die.
Yes.
Interrupt that process. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I just kept thinking of that. Like, we're created similarly, you know, and it is amazing to me how they've brainwashed us into thinking we need to ask for their permission to do things or their help.
Yeah. And you know that it's a type of brainwashing because they're using fear to be the driver. Like, if they were really concerned about mothers and babies dying in childbirth, then they would be looking at the evidence and they would be doing particular things in supporting a woman during pregnancy, birth, and labor and postpartum that actually shows that this is a good thing. And we know that women having multiple C-sections, research shows that's not a good thing for the It's dangerous for her. Yet we're living in a place where, no, just come in, schedule it in. It's so much easier. And, you know, it's not to like bash on C-sections, but it's like we're talking about the research. Like, if they truly cared that that's what their heart and their intention was, well, then that wouldn't be the recommendation. And I think that's a good thing. You know, if you hear people doing that and it's going against what you know is safe, red flag. Red flag, red flag, red flag.
Yes.
They're doing red tape and we're throwing red flags.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So do you talk about, like, when you're out in public and, you know, you've had baby and not in that postpartum bubble as much, but when you're feeling a bit more yourself and your relationship with baby has really grown into it, do you talk about, like, free birthing with people, like, just randomly if they ask you, are you thinking about it?
Everybody knows that I'm the crazy one who...
Me too.
In fact, my husband, he lays flooring. And last year, he was doing a job. And no, it wasn't last year. It was when I was pregnant with our fifth baby. And I was close to my due date. That's right. And he was doing a job for somebody in a different town. And he was telling them that, you know, he's getting ready to have a baby. And he said something about doing it at home. And this lady said, "Oh my gosh, I heard about this couple in Cody who had the baby unassisted." And he was like, "Well, that was us."
That was us. That was Memphis Mobile.
Yeah, no, I'm very open about it. And I do feel like men are more receptive to it, interestingly. They think it's really cool. Women are, I mean, some women think it's really cool. Some women are like, wow. And then some women are like, "Oh, I could never, you know." Yeah. But men I've not met a man who has thought it's weird or they just think it's really cool.
Like, I found that exact same thing too. And like, my husband will be just off talking to Renna. He's so social. I love it. Yeah. I'm not as social as he is. But yeah, he'll be off like telling everyone. And especially after I have a baby, he's like, "We just had a baby. She did it at home and she's amazing."
Yes.
It's so beautiful. Like, it really is.
I know.
But, and like, it's interesting because, like, he'll talk to other men and they'll be like, "Oh, that's really poor your wife did that." And then, like, the wife, if I were to talk to her, sometimes I feel like, you know, some are receptive and like, "Oh yeah, okay, that's nice." But I wonder if there's like, I wonder if it's mostly associated with like their own birth trauma, or what they've been kind of like programmed into, you know, believing about themselves, or the generational thoughts that's been spoken over their family and the women in their family, that they can't do this. And we just, you know, we don't have the birthing hips you know?
Yeah.
You can't do that. All the women out there, like, can't do that. And it's like, oh, but yeah, I found that, like, even the other day, we had someone fixing one of our windows because it had broken, and the wife was pregnant. She was doing all the admin stuff, and we're chatting over the phone, and her husband, like, came to fix the window, and he's like, oh, so where are you birthing the hospital? Are you doing it for, like, the hospital? And I'm like, no, like, over there. Like, that's the plan. And he was like, what? That's crazy. And yeah, it opens conversations. Like, not everyone feels comfortable to do that. But I always like asking, like, women, especially if they do feel comfortable, like, have they had anyone be super crazy? Which, you know, I have. But, you know, what's that experience like to be able to talk about it openly? Because there's a lot of, like, there's a bundle of things. Like, there can be a bit of shame, like, as if they are worried they're going to be shamed, even though they don't feel shame, because they're like, free birthing was good. But the judgment from others and the shame that people want to bring on you. And then, like, all the fear and just trying to protect that space. And but I know that I've had many conversations that have led into
I've thankfully, people have been very respectful around me, and it could be a Wyoming thing. That's kind of how Wyoming is. Wyoming's very like, okay, you do what you're gonna do, you know. Because I just haven't
crazy lady to herself.
Yes. In fact, this is kind of a funny story. My dad was so proud of my doing it unassisted, and he thinks it's just the coolest thing ever. And he used to be on this shooting club. He would go shooting with guys, and one of the guys was a young guy. He was at a shooting tournament. One of the young guys there was telling him that his wife was due, and my dad went all into unassisted birth. And
my dad,
he was like, here's my daughter's number, call her.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that is so sweet. Funny. But
so, with your husband, did you have to, like, was he totally okay with free birth to be? Oh,
when I was first telling him about unassisted births before, like, I had, you know, finally accepted that that's what I was going to do, he was like, that's a little weird, you know. You know, kind of the same lines as me. We just were like, that is crazy. These people are nuts. They're hippies, you know. And then when I told him, I actually called him in tears because of the hospital. I was just doing this roundabout with the hospital and the payment thing. And I called him and I said, listen, I was like, we're having this baby alone. I'm not going to. And he was like, okay, we'll do it.
Yeah, I love that.
And so he just was on board right away, and I didn't have to convince him. Yeah, I was very thankful. He trusted that I knew what was best for that.
And that's huge. Like, in that, I know that some women have this idea that men, well, not just women, but society has this idea that men are not important in the birth things. And it's so untrue. Like, it can, especially when you're husband and wife and have this, like, deep, intimate relationship with one another, that trust, to know that they are still trusting in you and that intimacy is still there. Like, it brings you through. It helps you be able to make those confident choices and know that you're backed by someone who loves you and trusts you and cares for you. And you also trust them that if you were making, like, I know, like, haha, it's wild, but if they truly thought that it was crazy and that you were doing something wrong, they would talk to you about it. You can have that trust, that open communication. So, yeah. I think my husband, his name's Eric, and he would love to, like, see more men speaking about not birth or trying to take over birth, which is the woman's role, but how men can be men and godly, like, strong, godly men in that space. So it's a little side note that I, you know, throw out there. But he loves hearing about other men who are just like, I trust my wife. And it's so funny because it's like listening to you talk about your dad, it's like, it feels like almost like he was like, she's badass. Like, you know, like, you know, in a really good way. Like, it's like, it's that respect, like, as a woman, that you've just done something so incredible, and he acknowledges how big birth is. And he's like, she did it. That's my daughter. Like, she's badass. I love that.
And what's kind of neat too is my mom actually I have 3 siblings. She had the last 2 at home with a midwife, but that was during when midwives were illegal in Wyoming. So she kind of broke the law. And so my dad kind of thinks that had they continued to have children, that they might have ended up in this unassisted. They didn't know at all about it, but my mom hated being messed with, hated it. And so she's just the type that wants to do her own thing. And so she had these illegal midwives. She did not like the hospital experience whatsoever. And so my dad always says, I think if we would have kept having kids, we would have had unassisted.
Yeah. Very mom.
Yeah.
And you were talking about your mom as well, like her working through her own fears and stuff. I think that's huge. Like, yeah, because as someone who just does support women in free birthing, one of the things that women can get concerned about is bringing people into my birth space. And it's a huge thing. It's a big deal to be invited or to invite someone into your birth space. So I think that was a huge takeaway for me in how I can help continue to support like the local women in my area. Of when they're deciding who to bring into their birth space, it's how are they responding to that fear? What is the fear? Because it's like, look, everyone has some type of fear in birth. It's what they actually do with it and how they process it. Are they actively trying to work towards releasing that fear, giving that fear a go? Yeah, and I think that's probably that's been really cool to hear because it's made me think. Yeah, I think that's how you can kind of determine whether or not someone is ready to be in your birth space. Yeah,
and one thing that I
taking control of their own.
So going back to my mom, she didn't tell me that she had any fear until after I'd had my son, and in fact, I would go to her. I remember going to her and crying because somebody was asking me too many questions about what I was doing. And when I was preparing for that first anesthesia, I told nobody what I was doing. And so I went to her and she goes, we don't owe anybody an explanation of what you're doing. And you just pray about it, and turn to God.
I really do appreciate you coming onto the show. And again, I so appreciate every time when a woman shares her birth story because there's so much vulnerability in that, especially knowing that recording and then releasing it out there. And I just, on that note, I will say I love to pray over the birth story. And but again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you so much for this time of fellowship, Lord. I put Sadie up to you, Lord. And put his story in front of you, and I just thank you so much that you have worked from one all the way to now another step's coming, that you've worked in each and every one of those pregnancies and birth and postpartum, Lord. And I just thank you for being with her in every step of the way in each of those stories, Lord. And I thank you that you've given her the ability to share her stories. And I pray that each and every one who's listening today, Lord, they feel encouraged in their faith, no matter where they are in their birthing, pregnancy, postpartum journey, motherhood journey, Lord, that they feel encouraged in their faith. I pray that this be such a light to the world and that we bring the women to the story, Lord, and that we are just the vessel putting these stories together in one, consolidating them into one take. Yeah, and I just pray and bless Sadie as she goes about her day today, and I just pray your hand, peace, and Holy Spirit over her next birth that she's coming out to have, Lord. I just pray over her pregnancy that it's filled with joy. It's so spirit-led and just filled with so much joy, not just peace, Lord. And thank you for the peace, but I just pray that as she's going into her labor, Lord, that it is filled with joy too. She can look back and just laugh at moments in her birth and her pregnancy, and it be contagious and it be that light as she shares that story again and again after. And so, Lord, I just thank you for the day, and I just thank you for this time that we've had together, and pray that your will be done in this episode. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
So yeah, thank you so much again for coming on, and I'm so excited to hear about your next rebirth. Let us know how you go, because I'm sure we would love to have you back on the show and see what that's done a third time, like for Freebirth. Yeah, it'll be awesome.
That would be awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So yeah, have a great day, and we'll chat again soon, I'm sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the show. Tune in next week for another episode of Freebirth with Jesus.
To share your story on the show, check out our website and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at awaken.birth. Don't forget you can watch this episode and more on YouTube.